The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André. I'm your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song Superpowers. Big thanks to you for tuning in to episode 2 of season 5, the second of our weekly edition episodes. So today we have with us a very special guest, which is Michael T. Gilbert, creator of the Mr. Monster comics. We do get into the origin of that initial Mr. Monster comics from way back in the day, and then how it got to where he did the more modern version of the character, which is the one that is beloved by most, myself included. Very excited to have him on the show, and yeah, I mean, it was kind of a dream come true. I grew up reading Mr. Monster comics when I could find them at my local used shop. It was called Volume 2 in Antigonish, and I used to go in there and pick up whatever comics I could find. A few of them were these Mr. Monster comics, which I got a big kick out of. And he's got some exciting news about the future of that series, and the past of that series kind of coming together in a beautiful way, which I won't spoil. I'll let you listen to the episode and learn about yourself. Great conversation with Michael. Really cool. I mean, this show has given me a lot of beautiful things, a lot of great conversations, and managed to talk and get some insight into some of the creators that kind of shaped me and brought me a lot of joy throughout the years. So I'm very excited to be able to talk to Michael. It's kind of a dream come true. Never thought I'd get a chance to do that, and it happened. Big thanks to Davin, my producer, for doing that as well. Hopefully with Davin in the new year, some big things will be shaking up with the show. We'll have some fun new stuff to come as well. So thanks to him for making this happen. And check out our podcast together, X-Rated, the X-Men Anime Review Show, which him and I watch the old X-Men cartoon from the 90s and review it. And we've caught up, waiting for the new show. So we're going through the X-Men movies, chatting with some of the creators, and having some fun side sojourns, if you will, which is a very fun little project and a great, I call it the sister podcast to this one, because sometimes we do get to interview creators and artists that worked on that show. And it's a similar vibe to what we do here, just, with Davin's special flavor mixed in. So it's a good time. But this episode is, with Michael T. Gilbert, which is very, very cool. If you know Mr. Monster comics, I'm sure you love them. It's a perfect blend of action, horror, comedy, and all the good stuff you like from classic Two-Fisted comics, which I was very happy to talk to him about as well. So now that we are at the weekly format, the episodes are becoming fast and furious now. I'd love to be able to do a bi-weekly thing, but I don't think that one's going to happen. Just life's too busy unless I can get this thing going, chugging along at a rate that'll start making primo De Niro, and then I won't have to worry about it. But unfortunately, until that day comes, we'll just stick with weekly for now. But I appreciate you being here along for the journey. I know the format has changed a little over the years, but I think we found our stride. Ain't no one going to break our stride. Ain't no one going to hold us down. We've got to keep on moving. I believe I created that. All right, well, stay tuned to new developments in the show as they break. But for right now, I think we are in our stride, and I think the new episodes are becoming weekly now, so I'm glad you're along for the ride. I'll tell you more about who the next guest is at the end of the show, but for right now, we might as well not waste much time since we are kind of chugging along at this breakneck speed of a weekly pace. Let's just get right into the episode. So here's my conversation with Michael T. Gilbert.
My pleasure.
It's a real honor to have you on. Mr. Monster is one of those things I discovered early on as a fun little independent comic, and I was a massive fan of it. So when my friend Davin passed along your name, I was like, holy crap, really? I was super surprised and excited to have you on. So this is amazing. Where are you joining me from?
In Stowe, Ohio.
Oh, really? Stowe,
Hmm.
Ohio. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I know roughly where Ohio is, and I assume Stowe is somewhere near the center.
it's near Kent. It's about 45 or an hour from Cleveland.
No, is that where you grew up? Was that home for you? Or
No, that's my wife's home. So we
okay,
moved back here about 5 years ago. But I moved down here in '82 to work with Craig Russell on Elric, and so I've
yeah.
been here for a couple of years.
Oh, very cool. So, sorry. So, where you were born again? Sorry, what was that?
New York.
New York. Okay. So, was comics always a part of your childhood? Is that something you grew up into, or something you discovered later on?
It was pretty late, like 7 years old or so. It's no, I was hooked very early.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and after my first one, I had to be forced to read my first one, and after that, it was like I kept bugging my grandmother to keep giving me more comic books every time I visited. So it drove her crazy, but she started it.
Who did the forcing? Was it your grandmother?
Yeah, well, my mother and grandmothers, they were trying to get me to. I was like maybe first grade or something like that, and I didn't want to read the Dick and Jane and all this stuff, so they were trying to get me to read. So they gave me a Jimmy Olsen comic book and said, "Here, try this," and they sort of forced me into it, and I read it, and that was it.
The chain was off, so to say.
Yeah, yeah, I was
Were
off and
they
running.
were they happy with the monster they created? Like as you seem to want to be heading into a career in comics, is that something they were happy with, or your folks?
I think so. They didn't seem to they were encouraging. They didn't,
Hmm.
So I was fortunate there. I figured my two when I was young, I thought my two possible things would either be a brain surgeon or a trash collector because people would throw out comic books in the trash, and I was hoping then I would get somebody. Of course, I was kind of young at that point.
And what was tempting you towards brain surgery?
Oh, that I think is what my mother would have liked, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I like that the two incredibly different ends of the spectrum. It's like either incredibly complex medical procedures or collecting trash. Not to diminish trash collecting, but hey, you're right. It might be a good way to get some comic books. I like that even as a child, you're already thinking in that way. You're like, how
Right.
can I?
Well, it's funny because right now I'm reading a book on trash by the cartoonist Durf. He
I
used to
love
be a
that book.
trash collector, and I'm certainly glad I didn't get into that racket.
Oh
It's
yeah,
pretty dirty.
it's a harrowing read. I
Mhm.
Durf Factor, yeah, I'm a big fan of that book. As well as like I think I read My Friend Dahmer, and then I saw he had other books, and that was the next one like in the list if you looked at the shelf at the store. So
Mhm.
I think someone gave me a gift certificate or something, and I picked it up right away because I really wanted to read it. And I think I read it on a beach in the summer. And
Uh,
yeah, it was a nice read. It was a nice sitting there and sort of like, being able to look at the horrendous, gross, monstrousness of that industry while looking out at a nice serene beach. It's a nice juxtaposition. But that's a great comic. Cool. So, what were your parents like artistic leaning themselves? What did they do?
my father was a tailor,
Hmm.
um, and my mother was a housewife basically most of the time. Um, Very intelligent woman, but didn't um, seem to be content to work stay at home.
Hmm.
Um,
Taylor, that's like seems like I know it's still an existing trade, but it seems like one that you don't hear about as much in the modern day, as it were. It just seems to kind of been
uh,
folded into like clothing stores but
well, I think more and more we're getting clothing that you just disposable clothing. You wear it for a few months, and if it wears out, you just toss it. Back then, everything was repaired. Whether it was uh, stoves or refrigerators or clothing.
mm,
Now it's like, okay, well, this part broke, and it would cost $500 to fix this little part. So gets 700, I can get a new TV or a new whatever.
yeah, that is very much a comment on our times for sure. But yeah, it's like I do that era. I kind of wish we still had. Like I've gone to a tailor enough times to be like, there's something that I miss about that part of the past that we kind of lost. When you get to go to a specialist, sit there, talk to them about what exactly you want, get the proper measurements, get the proper fitting clothing. I've had a few suits tailored, but nothing as much as I would have liked to, and it's a shame because it feels like that's getting to be a lost art form instead of just buying stuff off the rack.
Well, a lot of that stuff, like getting shoes or something. They used to have a guy who would come here and he'd measure your shoes, but you know, you're largely on your own at this point. So they were getting stuff cheaper, but it's not necessarily better.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Every time someone tells me about as I get on in life, I find that that's something I definitely appreciate more. It's like I'd be willing to spend a little more on something that'll last a while
Hmm.
than buy a $20 pair of shoes from Walmart and then have to replace them in 2 weeks or a month or two. So
Right.
I'm willing to spend a little extra for quality, which is something that I feel like in modern society you don't get as much.
Yeah. Well, another thing that you're just talking about kind of reminded me about that. My wife comes from Ravenna, which is only about 15, 20 minutes from here now.
Mhm.
But back in the 50s and 60s, it used to be this lovely little small town with all these bakery owned by this person and the hat store by that person. So everybody, it was more human scale in a lot of ways. And now, of course, it's the usual. Here's your McDonald's over here, and you know that and the other stuff. So we've lost a lot of that, I'm afraid.
Well, I think the advent of the box chain store may have brought that along because you can just go to one place and get everything, right? Get your
Sure.
shoes, get your
Hmm.
clothes, get your now your groceries at Walmart.
Right.
You can kind of get everything in one spot. So it's unfortunately it's a lot of the mom and pop outfits get lost to the wayside. Although, like I collect records, and there's still like a resurgence in like record stores and stuff like that, which is kind of nice. Like privately owned, there's still a decent amount of independent comic stores where I'm at. I'm in Nova Scotia. Canada.
Hmm.
So there's still like nice dedicated group of people keeping the record stores and the comic stores and some of those things alive, which is nice
Hmm.
to see. The comic store seems to be almost not quite, but almost one of the last bastions of that industry in the way that like Walmart doesn't have a comic shelf or like some of those places don't.
Hmm.
Some of the big bookstores like Indigo and Chapters and stuff out here have got the graphic novel section, but still to go and look at you get the little comics or the independent comics or the out there stuff, you still know better place in a comic store.
Well, yeah, you never know where you'll find some of this stuff. I was very surprised very recently to find out that there was a complete Little Nemo collection for $40 from Target.
What?
Go and look on it.
I will. That's amazing.
Yes. So that's what Janet's getting me for my Christmas present,
Oh,
Hanukkah present.
well, that's perfect. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah, I got
And
that's great. A Target. Okay.
and I think they also had a big EC collection, a recent that Fantagraphics put out.
They have
Um,
quite a few cool ones. I've been collecting some of the ones they've been doing of they have like the Wally Wood collection, so it's like all of his stuff, or like I've been grabbing a bunch of those. So they'd be different. They have like different titles, like Taint the Meat and different ones like that. But
oh,
it's
right.
all yeah, but it's all
They
from
devoted to a different EC artist each
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
like Common or Wrightson or any of those guys are in or have their own sort of thing. I've got quite a few of them, but there's so many. It's hard to keep track of them all.
Well, there've been so many. It's funny because they considered in 1956 when they went out of business, it was considered to be this. EC was this big failure. It just came and went and didn't go anywhere. And ever since, the excellence of the work itself has kept it in prints. And I don't know how many different reprints they've had of the entire
Yeah.
output that they put out, which is I don't think any other company has ever done that much
Well,
page for page.
I think the Comics Code kind of killed it initially for the most part, but the
Hmm.
yeah, but even when I read those, it's funny because recently I got a box set of the Tales from the Crypt TV show, which
Yeah.
I was pretty young when it came out. I mean, I was probably '90s, late '90s, so I was probably like 10 or 11, and so
Mhm.
I was my parents did have cable, so I didn't get to really watch it. I caught scattered episodes on reruns on some channel I could get, but I always really liked it, so I grabbed this thing, and it's funny because as a kid I had some of those reprint issues where they reprint the old EC comics, And one of the
Hmm.
ones that I read the most was one that was the Santa Claus one, where the
Oh,
mother,
right.
the mom kills the husband, and then she gets the news report that there's the deranged Santa Claus guy dressed as Santa Claus running around, and to keep him out of the house, he only attacks women. So it's this whole thing, and then of course we watched. We plugged in the show when I got the box set. My wife and I watched the first episode, which is the adaptation of that particular story, which was just so surreal to, you read something so much as a kid and then to finally see this other version. And I think Zemeckis directed it too, which is like awesome. But
Hmm.
I was just like so floored to see it physically there, and I was like, wow, this is surreal.
Oh, well, it's amazing if you're a comic fan in 2023
Mm.
as opposed to,
Yeah,
1966.
yeah,
In
oh yeah.
1966, you had a Batman movie that was knocked off quickly, and that
Mm.
was your superhero movie. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I often talk about that. Like, even me 20 years ago to say I would see Thanos, like Jim Starlin's one of my favorite comic creators, and Thanos is like my favorite villain of all time. So if you didn't tell me I'd see him in a movie, especially a bunch of movies, and especially one that would, really treat him as the villain he is, I was like, I would say you're crazy, especially Rocket Raccoon and Groot and all these characters. I'd be like, I'm never going to see that. So, but
Well,
even
yeah.
and that's even
And
like 10, 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago, I guess. But
yeah, and making $1 trillion, it's like,
yeah, exactly. On lunch
wow.
boxes and like everything. It's insane. But
Well,
yeah, I
it's funny
suppose the
when you think of,
60s was quite the desert. You had the
yeah.
Batman,
Well,
Adam
you
West.
think Well, you think about Stan Lee back in the 70s trying to sell properties to Hollywood. They just, weren't interested, or they did, some fairly lame TV versions. So I kind of like the Hulk, but that was pretty much it.
Mm.
Um, and now it's you can't throw a rock without hitting a superhero movie or two,
Oh yeah. And even
and
like
a lot of them are good too.
yeah. And even that the interest is so much there that now it's not even just the big ones. Like now we're getting adaptations of like Invincible on Prime and like all these other comics that are like kind of newer, but or the boys, like that show, like they're kind
Hmm.
of just grabbing everything that's kind of even related or some kind of a popular series or something that's a little different.
Right.
And it's so surreal to see that stuff being adapted. Like when I saw Preacher was getting adapted, I was like, this is fantastic. And then the Sandman series on Netflix, which is pretty great.
Yeah, that sequel to Watchmen
Hmm.
series
Oh
that
yeah.
came out, I thought that was excellent.
So
Yeah.
did I. Yeah, I was like, I know Alan Moore probably hated it, like everything he does that's adapted from his work.
Oh,
But
I doubt if he hated it, he probably didn't ever see
no,
it.
I
So he
I highly
hated it.
doubt. Yeah,
If he had seen it, he probably would have hated it. But
oh for sure. I think he drew a proverbial line in the sand a long time ago, and
mm,
he never had once has ventured over it.
uh-huh.
But I'm not going to fault him for that. I mean, hey, whatever. But yeah, that series, my wife watched it ahead of me, which is weird because she doesn't watch as much horror, like comic booky stuff as I do, and but she just raved about it. So I ended up, and I love the soundtrack. I've listened to a bit, so I finally got around to watching it, and oh man, that series is fantastic. If I had to choose a sequel to be the headcanon for the sequel to Watchmen in my head, that would be it.
Well,
Because there's been a few of
yeah.
them. So.
Well, I mean, if I had to, I compared that to the Watchmen movie,
Hmm.
and I didn't care much for the Watchmen movie. It just didn't do justice to my, even though they were trying to be literal adaptations of the thing here, it didn't work as much. But this really had a much more intelligent, mature feel to it than I felt that did.
Which really goes to show that it's just a matter of I don't want to say the limitations of the creator, because I thought the movie was okay. I kind of had a problem with they sort of amped up the violence in a way that everyone seems like superhumans, like regular people are like punching holes out of walls, like concrete walls, within people duck and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
because they're just trying to make it really sensationalist and sort of bigger. But
Right.
I like that series made it more human, and it also
Yeah.
shows that like they could have used the giant squid in the movie, and if done correctly, it would have had just as much power as it did in the comic.
Hmm.
I was okay with that change in the movie, but when seeing it, and especially around the character, the Looking Glass character, and his whole origin story. I always forget that guy's name. I really like him as an actor though, but his name I always forget it. The actor that played him, he was in like Oh Brother Where Art Thou. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah. Which
He played the leader in the Hulk movie from the Samuel Stern, the one that Edward Norton was in. But
Okay.
that actor.
Which superhero are we talking about here in the Watchmen?
Oh, Looking Glass, the guy with the he had the mask that was like a mirror that just reflected your own face on it. And he was
Oh,
when
I
he
haven't seen it in a number of years, so I didn't
oh
remember
it's
the
cool.
character called Looking
Well,
Glass.
on the HBO show, he was there. He was an addition on that one. He was the one that was like a
Oh, you're talking
missionary.
about the
Yeah.
oh, you're talking about the
Yes.
sequel.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The missionary character that was in New York when the squid got teleported in there, and then was
Hmm.
constantly afraid it would come back. Like that character was just so well depicted. I don't know. This whole show was genius.
Hmm.
Um, Genius all
Well, I thought it
around.
was something too because they talked about the 1920 whatever it was Tulsa massacre when
Yeah.
the whole town was killing blacks and this and that here, and subsequently we've heard about a lot, but I think it was because it was on this show when you got to, it got a lot of traction there.
Yeah, apparently that wasn't something that was well known, even in or even taught much in schools in America.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't taught much. It doesn't make America look very good.
It sure doesn't. I mean, hey, I'm in Canada. I'm not saying we're guiltless of our own dark histories, but when you look at that sort of stuff, it's interesting that even like things that are seemingly disposable in pop culture are shining a light on these things that probably should have been talked about or at least discussed in the public narrative that are
But yeah, when you have a thing with the whole town of whites destroying the whole town of blacks, you had to look it up afterwards to say this couldn't be real, could it?
Mm.
And then you found that yeah, it actually was real.
Yeah, and you had to find out about it on a TV show about superheroes.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the most. I mean, it's great that it managed to shine a light and bring attention towards that, but it's kind of sad that it also had to come to that. But
Hmm.
kudos to Lindoff and the guys that made that show for doing that. So, what was the first venture into comics for you? Like, what was your way in?
You mean
I guess
becoming a professional?
yeah. Like, what was the first comic you got out there, or how did you get your work published?
Well, I did the hard way. I published it myself. I was in college. It was in my last year of I was a senior,
Mhm.
and I was about to do my student teaching and then graduate this and that here. And the
Were
year
you
before that, there had been something that I had been doing cartoons for the school newspaper, and they had been planning to put out an underground comic book called it was State University of New Paltz, and it was going to be New Paltz Comics.
Mhm.
And they had been talking about that for 2 years before that. And I got there and I did some of my very first comic book stories, and they were going to be publishing it. And they didn't do it that year. And then the next year was going to be my last year. And I was waiting, I did a cover for the thing and I did, 3 stories. And I kept waiting and waiting for this thing to come out. And at the last minute, they said, "Oh, gee, Mike, sorry, but we're not coming out this year because they took the money for this to do a fireworks show at the end of the year
Oh,
instead."
ouch.
So I was so pissed that I came there. I took the negatives that they already shot and I took it with me. And I said, I'll see if see if there's any way I can publish this myself. Never having any interest in doing that or wanting to be a publisher, but it was like this is either isn't going to this or it's not going to happen. And started asking a couple of printers what they would cost to do this stuff, and one said it was going to be like $1,500 for a digest size comic, and I said, I can't afford that. That's ridiculous. And then I went to another one that said $400 for a large size one on good paper. And I said, I took a college loan for, and I got the money to do that. And basically, I was, selling some of it on the campus, door to door, before I did, and got some in the. Ron Turner took some underground cartoonists and such, publisher, and that was how I started.
What was the underground scene like then? Like, was that, I guess, what year would this have been?
This was 1973.
So, like, you would have had your Crumbs and all those other guys that were sort of already out there doing their thing.
They were there, but it was at the point where the comic industry was just about to collapse or in the
Right.
process of collapsing.
Mhm.
Plus, that was in California. I was in New York.
Right.
So it was a whole different different thing. But I was thrilled to actually, the boxes finally get delivered, and you said my comics in print. It's in print. That's what the big thing you always want, that you can finally have a comic book in print.
That's fantastic. So
And,
you're
so
really
that was a
hustling.
thrill.
You really hustle and
Hmm.
get it out there. That's very cool.
Yeah, and
So
eventually did about three more after that. Over one next year and a couple years later, and you know, but that's how it went.
yeah, is that how you got in touch with?
I actually moved to then I actually moved to California and
Right.
was getting my foot in the door in the underground comics. But again, it was at a time when the underground comics were basically on their last legs at that point. There had been um, a lot of busts of head shops and such where they were selling a lot of these things,
Mm.
and so there were fewer places to sell the comics, and there were um, anti-pornography laws, and that the very moral Richard Nixon and crew were pushing like crazy. So
Yeah, it's amazing how up in arms even today people can get about reading or books.
mhm.
Apparently the moral fiber of the nation is built upon a few funny books that people are selling out of a store somewhere.
Right.
Uh, that's really cool. Sad. I mean, it's neat that you're a part of that part of comic history because that was sort of a big deal. Um, and especially
Yeah, I
like,
kind of got at the tail end, so that was kind of neat to be at least a part of it. And from there, we went on to getting work with Mike Friedrich and the ground level comics that he was doing, like Star Reach and later Imagine and things like that.
and I've noticed online it said you did some work with Harvey Picar. Was that around that time period as well?
Yeah, I did one thing for him in '78, and then I did a few stories for him in around 1980 or '81 thereabouts.
What was he like to work with?
I we had it was kind of odd in a way because I kept asking for scripts, but he wouldn't send me the script. He'd tell me over the phone. So I was okay. We'll do it that way. I enjoyed talking with him, and I liked the work he was doing. I contacted him first because it's a fan letter to him. Um, and there was a one pager I thought had missed the mark because of the artwork. And he said, "Well, why don't you try redoing it?" And I did, and I got a few more from that. And at the end of those few stories, I got working with Craig Russell on Elric, so I didn't have any time for working on that anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine not. What was collaborating with Russell like?
Oh, that was great. He was, incredibly talented, of course, and remains so. Um, Very friendly guy. We got along well, and it was extremely intimidating.
Well,
You
that character alone too, right? I mean, there's a lot of gravitas that comes with those Moorcock books and that particular character. So,
Well, I wasn't really familiar with Elric for the
no.
most part, except for a rather bad adaptation that Barry Smith did in Conan, a crossover that didn't even look like him much. But
Hmm.
so I had to go and read the novels and try and find out what's what as we're doing this.
Oh,
And I
that's
never
good.
done any sword and sorcery before, so this was a new challenge for me.
And you
Um,
find it was easier to acclimate to that?
It was okay because my thing has always been a lot of I gravitate towards horror and um, spooky atmospherics and such, and Elric had a lot of that. And working with Craig, we were able to take some two rather different art styles and pull them together, make it work.
Yeah, I was curious about that because obviously his kind of has this ethereal, ghostly, otherworldly sort of appeal to it from the things I've seen that he's done. Of course, most notably the Sandman's his work with Stardust and Sandman and that Spider-Man story he did many years ago. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I was curious about how the relationship of those two would have come together, your style and his. So
Well, we had a lot of things in common as far as interests go. We were both inveterate Steve Ditko fans and such. So I think that sort of helped give us some common ground to work with there.
Huh. That's awesome. Which is I always find that amazing when I talk to people, especially artists, and like, they'll have a reference for some character or some artist, and you'll look at the work and you'll be like, you can see glimmers of it, but it's still so wildly different in a way. But you can kind of see the core of where the interest came from. I mean, especially with Ditko, because his style was so out there, especially even for that time period.
Mhm.
Um,
But
I-
we were looking more for the times, the stuff he was doing back in the 50s and 60s in
right.
particular.
Like the old Marvel stuff, the before Marvel when it was like was it timely? Where it was like all
It was
those
Atlas at that point,
Atlas, right?
and Marvel, but they were doing those monster
Yeah.
comic book stories.
Or
And
Monsters Dwell and all that stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
I just had a conversation with someone about that because I recently picked up the Marvel Unlimited they have now, where you can like if you have a tablet or whatever, you can get almost everything Marvel's put out.
Hmm.
It's like their monthly subscription thing. And a friend of mine was asking if they had stuff that far back, like the Atlas stuff. And I did a deep dive to see if I could find it for him, and it's all there. You can literally all of the old Steve Ditko, all of his Where Monsters Dwell issues, and all
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. It's all there, so which is pretty neat. It's cool to have a catalog so readily accessible of some of that stuff now.
Well, I mean, that's I just love having access to all these comics in digital form, things I could never afford to
Mm.
even open the comic up. It would just need to value it too much.
Yeah,
And now
right.
you get, I've got a pretty much complete download collection of Timely and Atlas from
Wow,
the 30s to the 60s,
that's
and I can
fantastic.
read them, I can study them, do whatever I want.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's such a great. Some people are really railing against digital comics, and I get it, believe me. But the average price of a comic book now being like $4 or $5, it's to get almost everything for 10 a month is hard to compete with, especially with
Hmm.
the rising cost of everything nowadays. But
Hmm.
it's still just great to be able to, like if I'm reading the Immortal Hulk story right now that Al Ewing did, and it's like I've always wanted to read it, and now I can. And instead of going to buy 20 trades or whatever, it takes 5, 10 trades to read it all. I can
Hmm.
do it. It can do it in a few weeks, or never get around to it. So it's a neat little resource, and it's pretty great. Especially I can see it as an artist or anybody working for Marvel, or I don't think DC has a version yet, but if you have to do work with any of these characters, I mean, you got to go back and see what other comics they were in or what the designs were. It seems like it'd be
Hmm.
a crazy good resource for that.
All right. Well, it's also great fun to see what kind of crazy characters they had in their earliest
Yeah,
days.
yeah, that's right.
I was looking at a copy of Mystic Comics from 1940, I think it was, and they had a character called the Thin Man, and he was not that thin man, not the detective Thin Man, but
Yeah.
he was a superhero that would turn really skinny and can go fit under a door and such. Just like, and lasted one story, but it was one that didn't catch on, but
It's
it was
like
fun.
a friend of mine had given me years ago this old comic. It was some indie comic called like Stardust, the Super Wizard. If you ever
Yeah, I love that
yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, that
Fletcher
says
Hanks.
Fletcher. That's his name. I couldn't think of his name offhand. Fletcher Hanks. Yeah, he so surreal. I have a couple of those trades of his stuff, and it's just very weird, surreal, like like almost like some strange cosmic punisher that spends more time thinking up insane ways to punish people than to actually, than to actually be a superhero. It's like putting someone
Hmm.
in a dimension of pain for the next 100 years or chaining them to some asteroid, like just all very elaborate ways of punishment. More so than that's more important than the actual fighting of the villain. Just this is whatever torture I'm going to put you through for centuries. It's
Hmm.
just really surreal stuff. Which is it feels like there was like a weird alchemy to that stuff where they were untethered back in the day, just stream of
Yeah,
conscious.
it just fill up space. We have 64 pages of comics. We're going to knock out stuff. I don't care what you put in here. Just put it in here. You're 16 years old. Go ahead, give us a comic strip. And some of the stuff looked like it, but some was really innovative and really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
that Stardust stuff is uh, it's really weird artwork, but it really, I think, works. I mean, you could take any one of those panels and blow it up and put it in a museum, and I
Mm.
think it would, fit right in there, just, Lichtenstein like.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So after the Elric comic was what was next? Was that Mr. Monster?
yeah. I had finished my contract with the Craig Russell. We adapted the first Elric book together in six issues for Pacific Comics. And then they were going to, Greg was bowing out. At that point, I was going to be working with George Freeman on the second series, another excellent artist. But there was some space in between. They didn't have work for me immediately. So they said, we have this anthology title called Vanguard Illustrated. And whether they were doing this, they would team up a working professional with an up-and-coming neophyte and, writing or drawing or whatever it was. And they said, would you like to come up with something? And I said, okay. And I thought, wow, this is my chance to do my own character here. But, what am I going to do? And I was going through my old comic collection for inspiration. And I came across a comic that I found in 1971 at a New York comic convention. And it was a coverless comic. And the first story was Mr. Monster, the Golden Age version of Mr. Monster. And, I always thought that was just the coolest thing. I said, I wish someone would revive this character, bring him back. And suddenly I said, why can't I? So I, redesigned the character, changed the name a little bit, and came up with a story. There was only one color story, about 8 pages before the company went under. It was a Canadian company called Bell Publishing. And I pitched it to them, and they liked the idea. And I was fudging with the amateur part because I suggested we get Bill Loebs, who was doing Journey comic book, but he had a very Will Eisner style, and I wanted a Will Eisner feel to the backgrounds and all this stuff here. And he was up for it, and we worked together, and that's how we got our first Mr. Monster story.
Cool. Was there any issue with rights for the original story that you had based it on?
Well, we didn't know who was having. We didn't know what the situation was because there was no indicia at that point in the original comic book, so I didn't know where it came from. Later on, there was some here. Nelvana claims ownership of the Golden Age Mr. Monster, but we've been okay as far as that goes. They actually there was a point where they licensed Mr. Monster from me in the 90s when they were thinking about doing a Mr. Monster cartoon show, but that was
oh man, we could have had a cartoon show.
That could have been Hollywood.
Yeah, how close was that to happening?
It was supposed to go on. They had done illustrations and this and that kind of stuff, and just before they were supposed to start work on it, Disney bought ABC. It was going to be on ABC, and they dropped it at that point.
Oh,
so
did they have a voice? I was curious who that would be. Yet,
did they have a voice?
No,
I don't know who they were. I don't think it got anywhere to that point. They had a couple of scripts that they had, but no, they didn't get that point.
So, was your love of those old horror comics was that what led you towards doing this character the way you had done it, with the two-fisted adventurer fighting monsters kind of character?
Yeah, that was part of it. I mean, I was trying to do with Mr. Monster was design a character that would display all my personal interests and strengths. I've always loved superheroes, but I had never done a superhero before. So Mr. Monster was my first attempt at a superhero. I wanted the horror elements, a horror-oriented superhero. This is before Hellboy and all those things came in the wake of. And I added humor because I was a real fan of Harvey Kurtzman, and when he was doing Super Duper Man back for the early Mad comic books and such. So I wanted to put all those elements together. The original Mr. Monster that was created by a Canadian cartoonist named Fred Kelly. He did his singular story completely straight. It was just a superheroes killing monsters, I really appealed. But I put a satirical element to it. So when I wanted to, I could be completely straight with Mr. Monster, but I can also be silly as I wish to with the character, depending on what kind of story I was telling it at any given time. I wanted a very flexible character, the way Will Eisner's Spirit used to be. He could tell a very serious story one day and just do a Harvey Kurtzman style parody of Life magazine or Little Abner or whatever.
That's
And
awesome.
I wanted that kind of freedom.
No, that's super cool. Yeah, super enduring character, and one that seemed to be around for quite a while. Still is in some respects, right? Are you still doing work with that character?
Yeah, I am. I've done some new Mr. Monster stories, which you haven't seen yet.
Ooh.
Right now, I'm working on what I hope to be the complete Mr. Monster library.
Oh, thank God. Okay, I was hoping one of those would come because I have scattered stuff, and I've always been really wanting to get the whole thing, which I'm very excited for. That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, well, I've gone through 40 years of files and artwork and this and that, and I've been reworking them. In some instances, they're stories that never had color. I've added color to it. And we're trying to make this the ultimate thing. We've worked so many different publishers over the years. I want to just get it all together, and you can see the evolution of Mr. Monster and all the different experiments we've done with the character. So should be fun. I'm going to try and pitch it next year.
Okay, so you're going through a publisher. It's not a Kickstarter or something like that.
We'll see what happens eventually, but my first thing is I wanted to get the whole thing done before I approach anybody.
Oh, fair enough. Well, it seems like a no-brainer to me. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one thing I'll show you real quick. I know this is an audio podcast, but a friend of mine, who's an illustrator, I came across this when I was doing some work the other day. His name's Mike Ruth. I'd gotten this from his booth a while ago, and when I was going through some art files.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'd picked this print up from him a long time ago, and I remember checking it out and being like, "Oh man!" So fortuitous that I was talking to you because it literally just popped up in my in some of my files.
Yeah, nice picture of Mr. Monster.
Yeah. Mike Ruth's a cool comic artist based out of Toronto, but he did some work for a lot of stuff for IDW, like covers for Turtles and stuff. But so you'd worked with Harlan Ellison as well, right? On
a story, yeah.
Yeah, what was that like? I mean, he's sort of a royalty when it comes to the science fiction community.
It was fun. He had some story that he had in some old detective crime pulp from the 50s, and he thought I'd be a good match for that. And it was fun working on that. It's just a kind of a little hard-boiled crime story, and I didn't get too many chances to do crime stories, so this was kind of fun for me to do.
That's yeah, like his kind of sort of branching into comic work. It's occasionally here and there. As a kid, I had a graphic novel adaptation of Demon with the Glass Hand,
right?
Which I had. I wish I could find it. I know it's here somewhere in my collection, but it's one of those things that was such a dark and interesting story as a kid to come across a comic like that. It was really different and surreal. And then when I found out, of course, later on that he had gotten a credit on the Terminator, as a Terminator, it must have been Terminator 1, because the similarities towards the both stories were too much to pass up, that he'd gotten a script writing credit on that. Yeah, I remember reading as a kid thinking this seems familiar, and then finding out later that he actually got on the writing credit for that movie, which is pretty amazing as well.
Well, he was pretty litigious, so yeah.
Yeah, well, I imagine as a creator you kind of have to be, especially as a writer and an artist, I suppose, especially nowadays with AI art and everything else that's coming out. Like, I suppose you got to be on top of where your stuff is showing up, because it's just getting everywhere all the time, and if you don't pay attention, it'll probably lose some big opportunities. But so you worked on Heavy Metal magazine as well? Is that something that I saw in your?
I did a Mr. Monster story with Simon Bisley that was printed or reprinted in Heavy Metal. So yeah, I think my foot in the door there.
Well, that's prestigious in its own right. I mean, did you have
sure.
Do you have a reverence for that growing up, or like when you came across the right age, I guess, to discover that?
Yeah, I was probably in my early 20s when it came out. And I thought it was really impressive, because you've heard about all these foreign artists, French artists, and Spanish artists, and this and that here. And it was our first chance to really get a chance to see a lot of these things. Think I had seen maybe an issue or two of Metal Allemand, which is the earlier version in French. And I was always interested in, gee, I wish I could read these things instead of just looking at the pictures. So when they would translate it to English, I got a chance to see some. And some were good and some had stupid stories, but
Well, like any anthology book, that's kind of comes with the territory.
yeah.
I think obviously as any kid my age, I'm 38 now, so the movie would have been in the 80s, right? And I remember coming across that somewhere as a youth, probably in a rerun on TV or something, and kind of being floored by it, and then discovering the whole series that it came out of.
Hmm.
So what eventually led towards the big guys come calling, Marvel and DC? She did some work for Marvel and for both, right?
Yeah. Well, I was at I think it was at San Diego probably,
Mhm.
and I think my wife was walking around and she spoke to one of the editors. It happened to be, and I think they were interested, possibly interested in doing something with me. I think that was I did a Batman story around 1998, um, and that was for Archie Goodwin, who was one of my heroes, both as a writer and an editor.
Mhm.
And he was really nice. As it happens, it was when he was battling cancer. So uh, one of his assistants took over, but we were able to go back and forth and hammer out an acceptable script, which I then illustrated. I think it's fairly unusual to have a writer artist, but I was doing a version of Batman, uh, doing a homage to three of my favorite Batman eras: the very early Bob Kane from the late 30s, the Dick Sprang, Bill Finger ones from the 50s, and the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil from the 60s and 70s. And I did 4-page segments on each one, done it entirely in that writing and art style.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Hmm.
Oh, I'll have to try to track that down. That sounds super fun. I actually was maligning that the other day to somebody, a friend of mine who's a massive Batman fan. We're just talking about the movies and where Batman's been. And I said, all the movies are great in their own way. I'm just sort of sick of seeing like dark, broody Batman fighting, people. I want to see him. I want to see the hairy chested Neil Adams Batman like having a sword fight with Ra's al Ghul on a mountaintop. That's what I want to
Hmm.
see. And then he's like, well, I don't know if that's great. I'm like, well, we got so many movies at the other one. Like we have so much dark, black, broody Batman fighting dark, broody serial killers that just have different gimmicks that sort of match the comic characters. I want to see him fight like Clayface or Mr. Freeze or
Hmm.
ridiculous fun like Detective Batman, like when Grant Morrison was writing it recently, like all that stuff, just kind of bring back all of the greatness stuff and pile it all in. I feel like we might be getting that with whatever James Gunn's doing in the DC universe, but I don't know. I do want a little bit more of that fun adventure-y Batman.
Hmm. Yeah, well, more down to earth Batman. I forget what I was looking at. It was some TV's, some mini series on some
Mhm.
thing, or maybe it was even one of those Korean things.
Oh yeah.
But they had some detective who was doing this, brooding detective, and I was thinking, this is what I'd like to see Batman doing. Spending his time using his brain, and searching down clues and going there, and then finally going after
Yeah.
the prey that he's after. And I just don't see too much of that. It's everything's bigger and bigger and bigger. And,
Yeah, I mean, like anyone my general age that's a nerd, yeah, I have a lot of reverence for the 90s cartoon because that one had a lot of that. You would get like the
hmm.
adventure stuff, but you get him solving mysteries and there'd be legit things to solve sometimes or a mystery that comes to an end and sort of a detective story more so than just a two-fisted superhero story. So um cool. So the Marvel work that you did, I think it's pretty neat whenever I hear these stories about people that kind of got their starts on the indies And then get, like it's nice to know that the big guys are reading or at least familiar with what's going on in places outside
Mhm.
of their own sort of house, as it were.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly how it started, but I think I might have approached Tom Brevoort, who was
Hmm.
the editor at Marvel. They were doing a thing called uh, Marvel Double Shot, which had I think it was a 4-issue series that had 2 characters per issue, and doing kind of retro stories in there. And I thought I'd fit in, and I think I contacted him, and he asked me what character I'd be interested in doing. And I, of course, said Spider-Man. He said, "Well, no, that's taken." And I said, "This one, that's taken. That one." So finally, I got to Doctor Strange, and he said, "Okay, why don't you see if you can come up with something with that?" And I'm a huge Steve Ditko fan. I love those early Ditko Lee Doctor Stranges.
Hmm.
And so I did whatever it was, 12 pages or whatever. I was doing a story that was a tribute to that. I tried to um, internalize what Stan and Steve were doing in 1962, 63. And it came up with a really fun little story about a where Doctor Strange gets caught in um, Aladdin's lamp and he can't get out.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Great. So is the current project, I guess, what's on the go right now, the Mr. Monster compendium, or do you have other books on the go at the moment?
This is the main thing right now. Like I say, I've gone through 40 years of files, and I'm writing liner notes in each of the stories. I had one story that was done in the style of a phony 1930s newspaper comic strip, like Dick Tracy or something like that from back 1930. And I had done that in 1993, and just got a section of a story. And I decided, wait, this might be a good time to finish that story. So I came back and I did finish the story in the format of a Sunday page and 6 dailies each time to tell the story. So I've been going back. There was one story I had worked on for Eclipse that the editor had made some major changes on, which I never liked. And I went back and I redid the story so the way I originally planned it to be. Um, that was a Mr. Monster Airboy special, but it was originally supposed to be a Mr. Monster Heap special. That was another swamp monster from Hillman back in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
very satisfying to correct one's um, editorial changes.
Is there much in your canon that you feel like you would behoove you to go back and do that sort of thing, or is that just the glaring one that?
That was the glaring one. Although I went back, there were some things that some stories I went back and I wasn't entirely happy with the coloring,
Hmm.
and we were limited because we were in some cases the colorist didn't have much time because we were always fighting deadlines, and now we have Photoshop, and I've
Hmm.
gotten pretty good at that. So I had a chance to go back and do it the way I hoped it might be. So that's exciting to see, giving it a completely fresh look. Now, there's some people who take that kind of stuff way too far. I
Hmm.
always thought that Neil Adams went back and did some of his old Batman and Dead Man stories and completely over colored it and re-inked some things. And I wish he just left it as is. So I'm trying to be judicious about how I use it.
Yeah, I've noticed that in some of the collections of his work, especially since he passed away. There was like some collections of like I just gave one to a friend for his birthday, and it was like the Neil Adams, all of his stories from DC, but it wasn't like the big books. It was like just the side stories he would have done, or the one issue things here and there, and different things.
Mhm.
And always the coloring seemed very modern compared to what his style was, it does kind of mess with your brain a little bit if you're used to the old style to see this sort of much more modern take on it than applied to what is a very classic sort of art style. So it's
Well, yeah, the art style and the coloring style too. One of the more egregious things to me was there was a Dead Man collection some 10, 15 years ago,
yeah.
and that was one of my favorites. Neil Adams projects from back then. I thought he was doing some wonderful work. Well, he had someone else ink the first story. He didn't like it, never did. I think George Bell did it, and it was weaker. I didn't care for it as much, but he went back and redrew it, and then did this completely overcolored modern coloring on this thing here. And so you have this is the first story in this, 200-300 page book, whatever it was. And it stuck out like a sore thumb. It didn't fit in with the rest of it. The rest of the book was this 1960s color, this flat comic book color. It was very handsome back then. And I wouldn't have minded if he kept that as an extra in the back of the book and printed the original color, so it was an extra, but it didn't. And I guess he was the 800-pound gorilla that, they weren't going to say no to if he wanted to do that.
Yeah, I met him very briefly at a comic convention in Montreal, Quebec, and I remember I sat in on one of his panels, and I got him to sign my copy. I think I had a reprint of his Muhammad Ali Superman crossover. Seemed like a pretty nice guy, but also somebody that you can tell that had a very distinct way of doing things, and I'm sure that if he wanted things a certain way, he got them. Or there was hell to pay is this kind of vibe I got. Although me and a friend had to discuss that he sort of harkens back to an era of comics, and now that he's gone, there are very few around like him that were the wear a suit and tie, or just a shirt and tie at your desk every day. Just your job was drawing comics. It wasn't like like everybody now, I assume in the industry are all people that grew up reading comics and had a reverence or love for them. And a lot of these guys from that era, your Kirbys and even your Ditkos, I guess, probably had their passions from whatever way, but the art was almost like a 9-to-5 job. You just sat at a desk in an office and you drew. And it just, you had the little things on your arms and maybe the little green visor and all that sort of, sort of stereotypical look. But, the idea of those days where it was just sort of the creativity was there, but also there's a professionalism kind of layered on top of it that sort of made it a job in quotes and less of seemingly of a passion. Because now, most artists work from home, or they, color digitally or do their own thing on tablets now, and it's all kind of a different world. But the idea that you had all these guys rubbing elbows in an office together that are all geniuses in their own right, just sitting at desks probably feet away from each other, doing all this crazy work. It's sort of astounding to think about that time period in history.
Well, and a lot of those guys, for all that, at least some of those guys were big comic fans. I know Neil Adams was, hugely into DC Comics in the 50s. And he would do his versions of Adam Strange and a lot of these characters. And he just, did page after page of this stuff, and he got better and better. Steve Ditko was a huge fan. His father collected comic books, thousands of them,
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
He had a big closet filled with comic books,
I feel like we don't have a definitive Steve Ditko story out there. Is there a biography or something out there now that is readily available? Because he always seemed very tight knit, or at least he wasn't very forthcoming with information about himself. Seems like there's not a lot available.
They're coming out with more stuff because now he's gone. His family has been releasing photographs of him, and
oh, cool, that's good to hear.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I saw a film that showed you people who know Steve Ditko nowadays in the recent ones, figure him as this stern guy. There's good and there's evil, and there's philosophy and blah 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 blah. I was at a Steve Ditko convention earlier this year.
Oh, cool.
The second Steve Ditko convention that was done in his hometown of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I actually stopped and saw his birth home and such. It was
that is super cool.
But they had some of his relatives had home movies that he did when back in the 50s of his family, because he would have these big family gatherings, and he had a great time. He was a cut up. They had a picture of him in a baby's playpen, and he had a baby's hat on, and you turn around and you see it was Steve Ditko, just mugging. It's just wow, it was great stuff.
That's awesome.
And you can see that in his more whimsical comics of the era. Sometimes he would do these really serious, spooky things, but sometimes he would do things about beatniks and just goofing around with the stuff, and it was charming stuff.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff in Amazing Fantasy, the old stuff me and friends used to really get a kick out of, especially like these weird morality tales where there's like some big the boot black, I think, was one that we used to laugh about a lot. It was like the story about like this rich tycoon type that's just horrible to everybody, and he's just talking about how he has to get there by 5 o'clock to sign this big thing that's going to make him millions and keep his empire in place, and he's just bragging to everybody and treating everyone like garbage. And then there's like this lowly homeless guy that offers to shine his shoes, and he's being a real dick to this guy while he's shining his shoes, and then his shoes take a life of their own, and he's dancing around the street and he can't get to where he needs to go, and he's like, oh no, it's like 5:02, I'm ruined, like I'm never gonna get to sign it. Everything was hinging on this deal. And of course the boot black turns out to be like an angel who's teaching him a lesson, and it's just like such a surreal ridiculous sort of thing, but like those sort of weird 5-page 4-page morality tales that would be in those books really showed.
I absolutely love those. I mean, they were aimed at 10, 11, 12-year-old boys usually, and they were just perfect for that. I mean, they were just short little stories, very accessible. Steve told the fantastic stories. Stan was much more spare in his wording, and didn't overwrite, and it's just great. They did a couple of 2-3 years ago, whatever it was, they did a couple of oversized books collecting all those stories together.
Cool.
And they're magnificent. I just love them.
That's awesome. Well, I don't need to take up any more of your time, I guess, Mike, but I can't thank you enough for being on the show. And,
it was my pleasure.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to discuss about any other work coming out, or just keep an eye out for that Mr. Monster omnibus?
Let's just keep an eye out.
All right. Well, I will be for sure, and I'll definitely share it with the listeners once it's out there, because I know I'll be getting a copy for sure.
Terrific.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mike.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye. There it is, my conversation with Michael T. Gilbert, creator of Mr. Monster, and a bunch of other books, which we talk about in the conversation. So big thanks to Mike for being on the show. Huge fan of his work. And, I don't want to dote over people too much on these shows, especially that I get to talk to some of my proverbial heroes or people that have influenced me in the comics industry. A good friend of mine, Aaron, who I got to spend some time with recently, does listen to the show sometimes, and tuned into the Mark Russell episode and told me that I was a bit gushy towards him, which is true. In hindsight, I probably was, but I'm a big fan of his work. And he referenced the SNL sketch with Chris Farley, who was interviewing someone kind of important. And he was like, hey, remember when you did that cool thing on that movie? And the guy's like, yeah. And he's like, that was cool. And then it was not really a question. He said that I had a moment where I did that to him, and I was like, well, I think I was probably probing to try to get him to expound upon that, and maybe it didn't take. Maybe it was just a lack of judgment on my part. But, I do my best. I try to have these fun, engaging conversations that seem more like a conversation instead of just me shouting questions at them, and not shouting, but spouting questions at them. But, every once in a while, I get a little starstruck just like everyone else. So I try to rein it in as best I can. But I really did enjoy talking to Michael, and his work did have a big influence on me growing up. And I'm super, super pumped, as you should be, for that library edition of all the Mr. Monster comics. I know I will be picking that up the second I am able. And I will try to share that on social media when it comes up as well. So hopefully you too will be paying attention for that. But I'll try to give you a heads up when I know too. But in the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. As we are now a weekly episode, you'll get to hear me way, way more. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a good thing. I think it's a good thing. If you're listening, you must enjoy it. So, more is good. I won't hit you over the head with it and do way too much, but a weekly show I think is tenable. I know a lot of the podcasts I listen to are weekly or bi-weekly, some even twice a week itself. So our next episode will be with Paris Elaine, who is a artist for Marvel Comics. Very excited to have him on the show. Was supposed to have him on before Michael T. Gilbert, but we had a windstorm here and my power was out. So I thought, well, let's give the Michael T. Gilbert one in the can and then move Paris to the next one. So Paris Elaine will be my next guest, and I'm very excited to chat with him as well. Hopefully you will be excited to tune in too. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Much appreciated. Please like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Check out any of the other stuff on the United Federation of Podcasts. There's a link on our webpage to see all those shows, mostly Star Trek, a bunch of ones about... there's a horror movie podcast with Michael Chan, who was in Star Trek. A bunch of other things as well. A lot of stuff around reality television, some other fun stuff. So check out all those podcasts and give them all a shot. There's a lot of fun stuff to be had and a lot of great listening in there as well. So tune in to them and also tune in here in 2 weeks' time. Oh my God, 1 week's time. 1 week's time. I'm still not used to that. I've had to edit previous episodes to get rid of that. I'm not going to do this one because, it's human. It's who I am. I make mistakes. But be sure to tune back in with my interview with Paris Elaine in 1 week's time. Goodbye. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.